weirdest, almost pop culture-y small details about how the Bush administration started the Iraq War was that deck of cards. Remember that? Saddam, of course, with the ace of spades. The ace of clubs was Qusay. The ace of hearts was his son Uday. Those decks go for about $1.20 on eBay right now. The Pentagon made that deck of cards because apparently they had at least 52 names on their most wanted list at the start of the Iraq War. Well, we've also got a most wanted list for the war that we're not officially fighting right now in Pakistan. Officially, Pakistan is our ally, and they're a sovereign country. And they're against us using our armed flying robots, those pilotless drones, to shoot missiles into their territory. Unofficially, the U.S. is said to have a most wanted list, an imaginary deck of cards, if you will, of about 20 names of al-Qaeda and Taliban leaders they are trying to kill in Pakistan. And I say kill deliberately, not capture, since officially we have no troops in Pakistan, and drones don't exactly arrest people. Well, in May of last year, something strange happened with a guy who was on that most wanted list. It's reported that he was, from Pakistan's perspective, the single most wanted man in that country. I don't know where the U.S. ranked him on our list, but I do know he had a $5 million American bounty on his head. His name is Baitullah Mehsud. Forgive my pronunciation. He's about my age, reportedly born in 1974. He's short, diabetic, apparently charismatic, and the head of the Taliban in Pakistan. Pakistan blamed him for assassinating Benazir Bhutto. He was that government's terrorist public enemy #1. And this is the weird thing that happened. Last May, Mr. Mehsud called a press conference at his house. In a huge one-fingered salute to everybody trying to kill him, Mr. Mehsud bussed reporters to his house, fed them a big meal, and announced to them that he was declaring jihad against U.S. troops in Afghanistan. Live and in person, in front of reporters, while there's a $5 million bounty on his head. Confident? You bet. Stupid? Yeah, maybe. We're now learning that the U.S. military appears to have killed Baitullah Mehsud with one of those drone missile strikes. U.S. officials aren't confirming it, but Pakistani government sources are saying he was killed on Wednesday. They say they verified it with his family members, and they say there were eyewitnesses at his burial, which was about a half mile from where that drone-fired missile landed. Joining us now is journalist Nicholas Schmidl, who spent 2 years as a freelance journalist in Pakistan, traveling through some of the most dangerous areas of that country and meeting with senior members of the Taliban, including some who had direct contact with Baitullah Mehsud. On my summer vacation this year, I was completely taken by Mr. Schmidl's new book about those experiences. It's called To Live or to Perish Forever, 2 Tumultuous Years in Pakistan. Nicholas Schmidl, thanks very much for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me on, Rachel.
So you met with senior Taliban leaders who had direct contact with Baitullah Mehsud. How did they regard him? What kind of role did he have?
Well, you know, I met most of these senior Taliban leaders in late 2007, the fall of 2007, including Maulana Fazlullah, the chieftain of the Taliban in Swat. And he was kind of regarded as someone who everyone looked up to him. Everyone knew that he had more suicide bombers than anyone else. He had more support. He had more troops. He was kind of this figure lording over South Waziristan, but he hadn't announced that he was the head of the Pakistani Taliban yet. So he hadn't sort of really burst onto the stage quite yet.
Pakistan blamed the assassination of Benazir Bhutto on Mehsud, and I mean, I don't know, while he may very well have done it. In your book, you say that you found Pakistan's public evidence against him in that case a little less than convincing. Can you explain that?
Well, you know, it was, my personal belief, he was responsible. But by the same token, the way that the government tried to prosecute the case against him was very hasty and was a little bit sloppy. And they apparently intercepted a phone call between Baitullah Mehsud and one of his deputies, in which they were congratulating one another on Benazir's assassination. And a young, enterprising journalist went to the alleged spot that conversation took place, busted out his cell phone, and found out that there was no cell phone coverage on the top of that hill, thus undermining the government's case a bit. I still think that all fingers point to him, but it's just evidence of the way that the government sometimes is in such a rush to pin blame rather than letting a prosecutable case develop.
As somebody who controlled 10 or 20,000 troops, as somebody who was the proclaimed head of the Taliban in Pakistan, if he is in fact dead, do you expect that's going to have an effect on the war that American troops are fighting in Afghanistan?
It's It's a great question. I don't think that it is going to have that much of an impact on what troops are seeing in Afghanistan, because Baitullah Mehsud had really turned his guns against the Pakistani state. Now, with 20,000 fighters, I'm sure there's a large fraction of them that were traveling across the border, were fighting against Americans in Afghanistan, but they really had, I mean, the focus of their jihad had become against the Pakistani state and less against NATO and U.S. forces in Afghanistan.
Well, the goal of U.S. troops in Afghanistan is supposedly sort of nation building right now. They describe it as counterinsurgency, but it's essentially to make the government there control more of that country and have the loyalty of its citizens.
Right.
That's also sort of the goal of U.S. policy in Pakistan right now, that the U.S. would like Pakistan essentially to be accountable for what happens within its borders, and they'd like to get some of these, what they consider to be lawless areas, under control. Does northwest Pakistan, the sort of lawless of all lawless areas, most lawless of all lawless areas, does it get more governable or less governable with Baitullah Mehsud gone from that region?
That's a great question. I think that it doesn't really make that much of a difference in the very short term. No matter what, the government isn't going to be able to implement development programs in South Waziristan now that Baitullah Mehsud is gone. And in fact, there's going to be an interesting power struggle that's going to develop amongst his deputies and his lieutenants over who's going to take over for him. And I think this is going to be the true test kind of the symbolic and the meaning of his death, is whether someone with a big name, a household name Taliban leader, steps into that role, or whether it's someone that's close to Baitullah but a little bit less well known. In that case, I think we could see potentially the fate of the Pakistani Taliban be something akin to that of al-Qaeda in Iraq after the death of Zarqawi, where sure, al-Qaeda in Iraq continues, but never with the same vigor that Zarqawi brought to the organization.
And wouldn't that be nice? Sorry, but briefly, it sounds like you're saying that the Taliban, we don't necessarily know them to be an organization that can be decapitated. We expect somebody to step in to be responsible for leading his 10 or 20,000 fighters. It's just a matter of who it's going to be. Is that how you see it?
I mean, the Pakistani Taliban are really a collection of gangs, and he was the overlord of all of these gangs. And he would logistically and kind of in a spiritual sense, I mean, he was the head. But I think that someone will step into that role. You know, the Taliban are by their nature sort of a regenerative militia, and so you kill one and you create 5 or 10 more. But still, this is a major symbolic victory for both the Pakistanis and for the U.S.
Journalist Nicholas Schmidl is author of the book To Live or to Perish Forever, 2 Tumultuous Years in Pakistan, which I enjoyed very much on my vacation and highly recommend. Mr. Schmidl, thanks for writing the book and thanks for being on the show tonight.
Thanks, Rachel.